because okay, the guys don't have them can still use a tent quarter, but they kind of have to use that for their shelter too. So yeah, it's a good idea. We're going to take it one step beyond. We're going to equip every company with about 10 of these. They're not individual soldiers. 10 of these will be given to a company commander. The company commander, 10, 12, however they can afford, it's a company of about 120, 130 guys. So you're talking about 10% of, and at this point, the Waffen-SS is infantry strength of several hundred. I mean, it's a couple regiments, that's it, going into Poland. But, so small scale, you can do that. You can make hundreds of these things to pass out to, in 10 and 12, get about a dozen to every company commander. So what he's going to do is, if they're doing an attack, well, he's going to send out scouts ahead, probably the lead element, the guys that make first contact will be wearing these. The lead squad of his 9 squads.
So hopefully you can get the first shots in before the enemy knows you're there.
And it works brilliantly. If you walk one of these in a European forest, in particular in a beechwood forest, this thing is a Romulan cloaking device. And the amazing thing about it is you can put the gear over it too, and it doesn't really break it up that much. It actually doesn't screw it up at all. The first year they did it, and once again, you got the guys in the technical development section that are thinking a little differently from the troops. They think one thing, the troops figure out another. But they got 90% of it figured out. They make these things. They make this thing with basically reach-in pockets, slits right here. Right, they're thinking, okay, you're going to put all your gear on, ammo, and everything, and this thing is going to be like this big camouflage blob trash bag that goes over you and covers you up completely. So when you're in combat, you just reach in here underneath your camouflage cape to get your ammo and everything like that, which is a big pain in the ass. It doesn't work.
Yeah, that sounds very difficult.
Right. So the troops realize, no, that's stupid, and helped out the German term for it. The guys that are doing the developments and modernizing these things. Okay. So the M38 and the M40s are the old design. By 1942, they figure out, you know what? Troops are wearing this under their gear anyway. Let's just put 2 pockets on the outside, and let's put. Oh yeah. When you're in the woods, it enhances it too. If you can go ahead and put leaves and stuff in it. So you'll see, guys, I mean, this is an example, but you got leaves all over it. So you go from being hard
you got
to
a ghillie suit
to absolutely invisible, especially if you're in the defense. It's always more effective in the defense than in the offense. But and the thing is, by definition, if you think about it, if you're in a forest, even if you're in a panzer advance, if you're in a forest resting, getting ready for the next jump forward, by definition, you're defending because you are in a patrol base trying to keep from getting overrun or having that French Polish artillery observer spot you and drop rounds on you.
Okay.
So
we start out.
They started out with just 10 per. By 1940, they figure out the machine printing of these things. They figure out the Germans, they figure out how to mechanize it. They figure out how to make these things cheaply, which is good because now it's not regiments. They're up to about 2 or 3 divisions now. Now you've got several thousand infantrymen in the Waffen-SS. Still, compared to the Wehrmacht, it's tiny. There's literally millions of Wehrmacht soldiers, sailors, and Luftwaffe guys. But the SS is now up to 3 divisions, and so there's probably 10, 12,000 of these things are going to get printed and sent out to the troops. And now, by this time, they've gone through Poland and the French campaign, and they've worked brilliantly. So everybody wants to now. An entire 800-man battalion, they got 800 of these. I mean, the clerks and jerks have these by this time of the war. And then the funny thing is, okay, look at those over there. That's Wehrmacht's pattern. Okay. Okay.
That's not nearly as good.
Yeah, it's functional. It's okay. I don't think it's nearly. They haven't improved on this in 80 years. The Waffen-SS stuff.
So we started out with each guy had a quarter of a tent.
Yeah, quarter of a tent.
We have 3 different styles here. They are they are authentic. Hand silk screen printed originally.
You will not see a single panel of war. If they are, I'll go and strangle the guy because you never bring this stuff. It's so expensive, and you're going to ruin that out in the field. So, there's companies there's a company in Kentucky that makes this stuff really well. It's not cheap, and he actually makes it because he bought a lot of the machinery that was used to make the stuff originally. It came out of the Czech Republic and places.
So they're still making it on the original equipment?
Yes, it's the only way you can make it. He's had to have some stuff fabricated, but and the sad thing is his entire labor force is 70-year-old women who can't get their daughters to come into work, so he's going to be screwed here in a few years when they all retire. But yeah, running these old 1940s, early 50s.
Well, it probably doesn't pay all that well,
He pays really well. He just can't get anybody to work.
which is
Yeah,
surprising.
it's skilled labor. I mean, it is. But yeah, that's America now. But so yeah, let's go back in 1938. Big organizations, guys with generals, pips on, talking to each other, discussing what works and what doesn't, and then these two big organizations start acting like 8-year-olds on a playground. Okay, 1938, when the SS is starting to do this, the Army looks at them and laughs because in their mind, the German okay, we're the German the regular army, the Wehrmacht. We're the successors of the guys that fought the Great War, and our great grandfathers routed the French and the Prussians. We are the guys who know everything military. So these amateur play political soldiers, they don't know what the hell they're doing. Okay, they're enthusiastic. I get it. They've got a lot of energy. Sig Heil, yeah, we get it. But they look at this camouflauge development and they laugh. They're not laughing after Poland because the reports come back that, yeah, casualties in assault groups where they're wearing the camouflage are a fraction of neighboring Wehrmacht units that are encountering the same kind of Polish opposition. So the word comes back, oh shit, this stuff works. So the army goes to the Waffen SS, who they'd laughed at, thought, okay, amateur play soldiers with these fancy little uniform concept. Well, shit, this works. They say, okay, we would like to go ahead and start making. No, we own the patent. We own basically the copyright and the patent. It's a Waffen SS pattern. You can't have it. So the army goes off and does that. And of course, the army being the army, it's big. It's got lots of manufacturing capability. They start making those by the hundreds of thousands, tents and everything. So the way big armies can do.
So was that silk screen or mechanically printed?
That's the same way, I think. By this time, the technology that the SS factories are using to make this stuff is going to be copied, replicated, probably 10 times as big to factories to make that stuff. Because now, remember, the Wehrmacht is supplying hundreds of divisions. The Waffen SS still 1940-42 is you're talking about the single digit divisions. You're recruiting 6th, 7th, 8th division. So small becoming a medium-sized force.
Now, how big's a division again?
A division's about 20,000. Really, realistically, 10 to 15,000, depending on type. Mechanized is a little more infantry. Panzer division might be closer to 10,000. So it's your basic, the easiest way mathematically to think about it, especially, to be honest, after a 12 or 15,000 man division has been hammered around for a bit, 10,000 guys. They ain't full strength. Nobody's full strength by the end of the war. So Waffen SS units actually are kept close to full strength. So yeah, they are going to be around 10,000. So you're talking about an army that is 3 to 4. I'm trying to think how big they were by the end of the war. And when they invade in Barbarossa, the map is 3 million or so men and 600,000 of their little buddies from Romania, Hungary, Finland, etc. Piling on. But it's about 3 million or so, 3.5 million. They actually outnumber the Soviets briefly at the start because the Soviets aren't fully mobilized. So they've got about 2.5 to 3 million that they bring in. Now the Soviet army is going to go from being big to fucking gargantuan by the end of the war. But at this time, the Germans got them with their pants down and briefly outnumbered them. So you think that kind of gives you the scope and scale. You're talking about 3 million guys in the army, and there was a documentary that was talking about the most lethal killing machine of the German army. It wasn't artillery, it wasn't tanks, it wasn't planes. It was the 10-man infantry squad based around the MG42 machine gun.
Okay.
And the way it was describing the preparation for the invasion of Russia is, as they jump off, these 2.5 to 3 million men in these 3 army groups that, from the Baltic to the Black Sea, what they're sort of the backbone of this force is 100,000 of these 10-man squads, is how they described it. Is, okay, imagine this 10-man killing machine built around an MG42. At that time, an MG30, actually, it was an MG34. Didn't have the 42.
So that's a million men.
That's roughly a million men that are frontline trained infantry. And when I say trained, I'm talking about 2 to 3 guys, 2 to 5 guys in that squad are veterans of Poland and or France, which means when they tell the 18-year-olds to jump, they jump, and they know what they're doing because, again, they've done this. In fact, a lot of them are 2 campaigns into their military career, 2 victories. So that's the army that goes into Russia, and that's what the Russians are facing is 100,000 of these squads, each led by a fairly competent sergeant. He's probably got a corporal that at least fought in the French campaign, and the other guys, yeah, they might have a few veterans, and then 5 18-year-olds that were brought in to flesh out the army to get ready for it. But those 18-year-olds were trained for 5 months with those sergeants, so they're drilled to, and everybody knows exactly what they're doing. They've been trained by guys who've killed people for real. Now that army, once the Soviets start losing people and having people survive and then move through, okay, they're going to get that kind of, but that gives you the scope and scale. You're talking about 1 million men just in the frontline infantry. Now you say that's probably 3,000 or 4,000 out of every division on average are, no kidding, grenade throwing rifle. Now it's like, that's not that much. There's 10,000 dudes. Well, yeah, the fuelers, the doctors, the guys that bring up the ammunition, the guys that man the artillery battalions, the guys. So yeah, you actually, in most units, it's probably about 5,000 trigger pullers and 5,000 everybody else in modern war that keeps things moving.
I'm surprised the trigger pullers are that high a percentage, actually.
Yeah, and by the end of the war, they and there's pressures. The problem you have is, yeah, they're dragoons. They're going through the rear ranks trying to replenish the infantry. The problem with that is, pretty soon you don't have a division if you can't refuel. You can't bring up.
Yeah,
ammo,
you got to have your beans and bullets.
You can't fix anything because all the guys that repaired stuff are in those maintenance battalions. You'll have 200 or 300 guys that just turn wrenches in a Panzer division. That's it. They wear coveralls, they turn wrenches. But they do that 16 hours a day, and they do it well. Which is why
Panzer takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it does take a lot of work, and it takes a lot of skill because there's so many different kinds of tanks. And that's why Panzer divisions just refuse to die throughout the war. Is because they keep getting tanks knocked. Oh, wait, they're fucked up for about 5 days. They'll be back. And then that's what the Germans did better than anybody else, was keep their stuff moving, keep their stuff in the fight. Very few tanks, and then that was one of the recent histories where the guy went through and digested all of the mundane daily reports of tank losses for 400 days. I mean, talk about loving to go through staff work, but he went through all this stuff, and he figured out it's like, yeah, 5 to 10% of German tank losses were catastrophic kills from another tank or an anti-tank weapon taking a tank out to where, it's done, it's burnt down, the crew's dead. The other 80 to 85% were tanks that, that's kind of screwed up. We're gonna have to haul that back to, it'll be back in the fight in 2 days, maybe 2 weeks if it's really screwed up, but it's gonna be back. And 2 or 3 of the crewmen survived. Maybe all of them, maybe one guy was wounded, so he'll be back in 30 days. But yeah, that's and it's the guys that keep things moving and repaired, and medics, again, that's what keeps an army moving. So again, when you talk about the invasion, yeah, it's about 1 million infantrymen, and then everybody else that just keeps things moving. Artillery, well, they're counting the aircraft, Luftwaffe crews too, and all that. Yeah, about 1 million infantry, and then of course the Panzer branch, the tankers, and everybody else that's artillery that's piling on. But that's so when you look at it's 1 million infantry. The invasion of Russia, so it's 1 million infantry. How many divisions it's 100 and something divisions. The Waffen SS consists of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd division. 4th sort of. 3 divisions. So yeah, they're small. Now by the end of the war, there's 38 of them. So it's growing up to become, it's mutating to become this medium-sized force that rivals the army. But through most of its history, through the early mid-war, it's 3 to 5% of the forces out there. So it is sort of a kind of a weird, kind of exotic thing that you see out there. But again, as you go through the war, then you start getting into the double digits. Okay, 12th, 13th SS, 20th SS Estonian, which is probably the finest pure infantry division the Germans ever raised. And it wasn't even German; it was Estonian.
Well, thanks for talking to me. You said a lot of interesting stuff.
Oh, yeah,
here.
yeah. So you read this stuff, and it's kind of amazing how the SS, it's an interesting force to portray because, when the people talk about, okay, it was the camps, it was the war criminals, and Germans will say, well, no, they were just soldiers like any other. They were just on the front. It's like the problem is the real truth is sort of a gray area in between. There were guys among these divisions, like 3rd SS, I'm looking at you, recruited entirely from camp guards.
Lovely.
Yeah. 3rd
And some of them
SS,
may or may not have even fully believed in the camps.
No, they're pretty much indoctrinated. The guys in third now. Second SS, that's is a different origin. They were basically organized.
So how
as
much did the
troops.
Germans officially know about the camps? Because you've heard different things
A
on
lot.
that.
It takes me back to some very awkward conversations I had with some people I loved. They're gone. They were my relatives in Germany. One of them, I met her. I first recognized when I first met her in Germany. It's like, God, you look like my grandma. That's because she was her first cousin. And I've been writing her, and then I go over to Germany as an officer, and I meet her. She'd been writing back to my grandma back and forth for, oh, good Lord, decades. My grandma never went to Germany, just kept correspondence with the family, so she links me up with the family in northern Germany when I go back. Her husband, of course, in that generation, was a veteran of the Army Group North invasion of Russia. And what you figured out is that they have a saying in Germany when they're dealing with Americans or anybody else that understands German culture and language, it's a term like, oh yeah, er ist Kenner. He is a knower. He's somebody who knows Germany. He speaks the language. He knows our culture. He knows us, and it's know in the sense of, oh, he's familiar with us. And then it's sort of like, yeah, that's the bright side. All right, yeah, it's Kenna. And then there'll be like, as far as when they're talking about the history and how much I knew about German history, so, oh, there's Kenna. In other words, he knows. They would try and kind of play off where, oh, we didn't really know what was going on, and they knew what was going on. What's come out in the archives in the 80s and 90s and everything was that there were camps everywhere all over Germany. They just looked the other way and just
Pretended they didn't know what that thing up the road was.
Exactly. Because remember, when you think about the camps, there's camps and then there's camps. There's death camps, and you can say, okay, they didn't know about the death camps. I'll buy that. The death camps were hidden away in occupied Poland, occupied Belarusia, Gdynia, Auschwitz, Sobibor, Treblinka for its brief life, but it killed 1 million people, so oxygen was weight class. The 6 death camps were massive killing machines designed to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Below that was called that's the Vernichtungslager, the VL, Vernichtungslager. The KZ, what they call the KZs, the concentration camps, there were hundreds of them. And that was your small scale camps. Dachau was one of them, where you're not sending people there to kill them right away. You're just simply sending them there to do labor for the Reich, to manufacture something. As you get into the war, every one of them is making something. They're making mess kits, webbing, mortar shells, webbing. It's going to be machinery operated by slave labor that's making this Waffen SS camouflage. All this stuff's being run by people who are basically rounded up: the Jews, the Gypsies, the Social Democrats that pissed them off, the communists that they didn't kill in the first year. So when you have that much of society is taken out and is locked behind, these loggers, yeah, I tried to avoid just calling bullshit with that, and I think they kind of recognized after a while. They didn't bring it up, and I didn't bring it up because they knew that I knew that they knew a hell of a lot more than they let on to. That generation is dead, so now Germany is basically dealing with a generation now that is wrestling with whoa, what did my parents know and when did they know it? Hard to say unless they had some hard conversations.
And what could they have done about it anyway?
Well, and the thing is, that's one of the rifts in German society in the 50s and 60s is they didn't have those hard conversations. Mom and Dad just they didn't talk about the war, period. And in a lot of cases, the kids didn't want to. It's like, you know what? You ain't talking about what I don't want to hear.
So now you got the grandkids and the great grandkids trying to figure out after
the
everybody's
generation
dead.
after them. They're the ones that want to dig through and get to the truth because they're a little more detached. They're not as close to mom and dad as grandma and grandpa. It's been awkward. And then now you throw in another generation reunification. Well, there's a whole other layer right there with East Germany bolted back on. So Germany's complicated. It's like I said, it's kind of a love-hate relationship as far as living over there and understanding. It is a convoluted society. The cool thing about them, though, is in a sense, yes, they did come to terms with the war guild, unlike the Japanese, who pretty much swept it under the rug. And, oh no, we didn't do anything anybody else did. So the Germans, especially that second generation after the war, if anything, it's like the grandkids of the people who perpetrated crimes have been much more forthcoming with trying to come to terms with what's going on. Their parents just were like, oh, you know what, we're keeping our nose to the grindstone trying to rebuild this country because it's beat up. And
Well, granted, they had stuff on their minds then. You know, it's
yeah, and then, well, the thing is, the reason also another reason they can bury it under the rug for a while to a certain degree is that the Americans and British are helping them because the Cold War rears its ugly head. So we're going to be buddy with the West Germans again. So we don't want to bring up any ugly crap that happened during the war because it's the mean, nasty Soviets that we all have to keep an eye on. And the Germans played that to the hilt. That's when they started.
I'm sure they did.
Talk about all the terrible war crimes that the Soviets. Well, yeah, they did. No kidding. The most frustrating thing, I guess, in a way, we don't deal with it anymore because there are no Waffen SS veterans to speak of left, is they had it was a public relations campaign, you could say, that they launched in the 50s to basically fight back against some wrongs that were done to the Waffen SS. What the Wehrmacht did was the main army, the guys that are 85 by the end of the war, 80%, 85% of the forces, washed their hands of responsibility for what happened in the Holocaust and then all the crimes happened in the East. They basically pointed and said, see the guys with the lightning bolts on their collar? Those are the bastards that did all that. The Wehrmacht was clean. We were just, fighting a war, and it was the Nazis and their uniformed SS henchmen that were doing all that. Wrong. The Wehrmacht, their hands were dirty too. On the SS side, they were wrong because they basically, after the war, if you're an SS soldier, you don't get any sort of pension because you're part of a criminal organization. So you fought, maybe you were even drafted into the SS in 43 or 44. You're like an NCO at the end of the war. You can't even draw a pension because you're a war criminal because you're considered part of a criminal organization. So they kind of went too far the other way. Well, the surviving SS generals formed a lobbying association where they basically did full-time public relations to try and move the pendulum back. And of course, their claims were, oh, no, we were soldiers like any other, which is like, not really true. So, it's kind of muddies the waters. Like, okay, you know what? Both sides are bullshitting you. The truth is somewhere in the middle. And when the dust settles, I think they ended up, I forgot what it was, the West German government ended up paying pensions to about 10% of the SS guys. It would qualify to be at the certain rank and had to be clear of any war crimes or anything like that. So it was a partial victory. It was a compromise where it's like, okay, fine, these guys can collect pensions. Oh yeah, and some of them, the guys that were junior officers, they can join the Bundeswehr and they can be colonels and generals even. Anybody else that was about major or above during the war, nope, we don't want anything to do with you. And it doesn't matter how skilled and proficient you were at your job as a Panzer battalion commander in 1945. Too bad. We don't want anything to do with you because they were considered anybody about major. I think that was the cut line about major and above was considered to be, you are old line Nazis and not people we want to deal with. But the people under them, the lieutenants, the captains, the sergeants that wanted to put on a uniform again and go in the Bundeswehr were allowed. So I guess they kind of found the balance in the middle. But I had some kind of awkward conversations with my, I guess he's the husband of my grandma's cousin, because he became a lot more forthcoming once I got about 5 or 6 drinks in him.
Okay.
At Christmas time, I was like, get him liquored up, and he'll start talking about stuff, mostly about the wounds he got. Because the guy was wounded like 5 times. He should have been dead 2 or 3 times over. He was a forward observer. He's a artillery forward observer.
Oh yes, lovely. That sounds very difficult.
You're just begging to get killed in that job. That's how many times? It was like twice, I think. He said that he was fortunate that the Russians that poked him with a bayonet to see if he was dead or not. He was fortunate that he was already so wounded anyway, or so damn tired that he couldn't flinch or do anything. And he said, "Oh, screw it." And he said, thankfully, a counterattack swept over, and somebody hauled his ass off to a medic station, within a few hours. So
lovely.
Yeah. And then he was also on one of the last ships to get out to Denmark at the end of the war. So, end of 44, early 45. So. He described that, but it's kind of weird when you talk to an old veteran and you realize just how disconnected they are from like the big history. Because this is a guy that's like a sergeant probably at the end of the war. And I asked him, "Oh, what army were you in?" Yeah, no. He knew what division he was in. he didn't know what field army they were. It wasn't his business. I thought that was kind of interesting. This is a guy that probably never knew, what organization he was in the German army. Probably above the division he was in, maybe the corps. It reported, the 20 or 30,000 guys that organized, held 30 or 40 kilometers.
And now we want to hold him responsible for everything done in the entire
Yeah, exactly.
Reich during
Yeah,
the war,
yeah,
and he doesn't
although,
even
like
know
I
what
said,
army he's in.
Yeah, the problem is this, and where I call bullshit, it's like, okay, yeah, so his wife living back in northern Germany didn't know anything. Well, they had a camp that was 5 miles old. There was a camp for laborers and Soviet POWs 5 miles from their house. And it was along kind of the main roads next to the railroad station, because that's where the inputs came in from the, for the factories that they were working. It's like, okay, so you didn't notice all that barbed wire and, the guards and the towers and stuff.
Well, we didn't know what they did there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I think another 10 miles down the road is a no shit concentration camp with Jewish prisoners. So,
No.
I don't know.
Anyways.
But it's an interesting force to portray, because again, it's kind of your first truly, I guess you'd say, the Wehrmacht in general, but also the SS is your first, what we think of as a fully modernized force, because it's got everything we see in the army state: camouflage, modern, lots of vehicles, lots of tanks, lots of top of the line weapons. So it's what we try and do is, I guess you would say it's the portrayal of the operational reality of what a Waffen SS squad would look like in the field.
Just hanging out.
Yeah. Just hanging out before we get the orders to pack up, get in the trucks, and head another 20 kilometers down the road, because the Panzer Division we're supporting just shoved in and took another town.
Hey, well, thanks for talking to me.
Ooh, starting to get warm now.